You're listening to the A Bit From Within podcast with Felicia Marty. We are so conditioned to hold ourselves to a different standard and to deny ourselves the compassion that we need. And when I look up the actual word compassion, it says to suffer with. When you have compassion for somebody, you're not condemning them. You're not telling them what they should do. That you're also not taking care of it for them, right? You're suffering with them. You are in that moment sharing and empathizing with how it feels. Hello there, everybody, and thank you so much for joining me for a new episode of the A Bit From Within podcast. I'm Felicia, and I am coming to you with a huge ocean full of different emotions right now. And because of that, I thought it might be fun to start today's episode with a card reading or card drawing. I've got Tasha Silver's deck here called Wild Offerings, and we're gonna see what comes up here right at the beginning. Okay, so I'm not going to lie. I had re-recorded this because when I did the card drawing the first time, 6 cards fell out of the box and I was like, well, that's not helpful. And so I was like, I'm just going to start over. And this time 3 of the cards fell, and I know that they're the same because of how they fell, and I had seen the color of the first one. It's this beautiful green card with these white daffodils around the edge. And this one says solitude, and it says, once you embrace the inner divine and your own sacred solitude, the right people arrive at the right time, exactly on schedule, without forcing or chasing. And then the next card says impatience. My life is unfolding in divine timing. All delays are beneficial. I'm always at the right place at the right time. And then the third card is direction. And it says, Lord, please show me the right action right now. Please bring a sign and a miracle that gives me clear direction. May I hear the promptings of my own body. And if for some reason I'm about to head the wrong way, please stop me. And normally I don't always listen to the cards when they're, tons and tons of them fall out, because I feel like that's just a lot of energy vibrating, and it's hard to know which one to listen to. But I do feel like the universe is very clearly giving me these 3 as like a package deal right here. And they all feel so interconnected for me with everything that I'm going through right now. I don't know about you guys, but the last couple weeks have just been really, really tough. I feel like things are just turned up right now. And, as I was preparing for today's podcast, I was doing a little bit of research for this full moon that's coming up. And I am going to be putting together my full moon guide, but I haven't finished it yet. So I guess a part of this was some research towards what other people are saying about this full moon. And there's this quote from a website called foreverconscious.com. They always do I really do like their kind of full moon or new moon insights. And this says, kind of in big bold letters, it says, change is in the air under this full moon, and it's likely that we will be called to shift direction or perhaps morph and rebirth an area of our life that is no longer working for us. And I thought, oh God, I can feel that in every inch of my bones, and I'm so tired. I feel like, can we just not? This is how I'm feeling right now. I'm like, oh, I don't know that I have the strength right now to metamorphosize. I feel like I've just been trying to survive. If I'm speaking honestly, sharing that a little bit from within, that is how I'm feeling. And I do feel like, I started off last week's episode by saying, change is in the air. And I think I was feeling that the week before that, and it just feels so big and so apparent. And I thought it was big then, but how have been moving through life this past weekend feels like the sands of, or the changes in the sand beneath my feet. Like it feels like sand. Like I don't got solid rocks beneath me that are steady and stable. I've got sand that is literally moving with every step. And I don't know if you guys feel that a little bit, like when your life is in a little bit of flux or things are changing, or you just got stuff up in your life, like topics, categories, things that are just relationships, work issues, all of that kind of stuff. It does feel like all of that stuff is turned up right now, and it can make you feel a little seasick. That's kind of how I feel. And I also feel a little overwhelmed and impatient and in need of direction and not wanting solitude. So that's part of the reason why I find these 3 cards so obvious in terms of what I needed to hear, but also as like really important little thoughts and prayers and positive affirmations to kind of help me cope with everything I'm going through right now. And I will say, just as a little astro check-in, or kind of with all of this stuff talking about the moon, before we dive into the rest of today's topic, that this one is going to be a big one. And how we can really know that is because we're actually going to be having 2 full moons this year that are both in Aquarius. So the sun moves into Leo on Friday, the 23rd. And the full moon happens right out of the gate on the 24th. And remember, every time we have a full moon, it's because the moon is across from the sun, so in opposition. So instead of the moon blocking the light of the sun when we don't see the moon in the sky, which is when it's a new moon, that's when the sun and the moon are together. Now we have the moon on the opposite side in Aquarius, so Leo and Aquarius. And like, Leo is a fire element, so sun's going to be coming into Leo. It's fun, it's vibrant, it's spontaneous, it's a little bit dramatic, it has a flair for excitement and theatrics. And then we've got Aquarius, which is an air sign. And everybody always confuses Aquarius with a water sign because it is a water bearer, and I think because it has, aqua in the name, like you automatically think water. But Aquarius is the water bearer. And what kind of brings it towards that air element is the idea that the water bearer is collecting the water. And you can even think of the water as, like these emotions and processing all of this stuff. It collects this water and then pours it back out so it can join something else or become something else. And there's this element of transformation and an element of change and also spontaneity, but also social justice and remixing things, right? Like putting a new spin on it, thinking outside of the box, pressing towards change, towards revolution. So we're going to be having this full moon in Aquarius on Saturday, and then we're going to go through the entire moon cycle before the sun leaves Leo and goes into Virgo. So it'll probably happen like right at the tail end of sun being in Leo, and we're going to have another full moon. And what I've noticed as I've been studying, astrology and the lunar cycles, is a lot of times when there's a double full moon in the same zodiac sign, it only happens, very so often. I think like once a year. It's usually extra time for us to actually learn the lesson. So what could be happening for a lot of us right now is that stuff is getting stirred up, things that we either need to accept or change or transform or let go in, or like we're going to be having stuff that we have to deal with. And we're going to be doing the best that we can, but we're going to be using this entire lunar cycle this time to kind of deconstruct it and then kind of have a redo in about a month from now. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think ultimately it's a wonderful opportunity for us. And if we think about it from that larger perspective, maybe it kind of almost even feels like, hey, you don't have to have it all figured out right now. So instead of feeling like you do, use this time to ask yourself all of the questions. Like, to really do some deep soul searching. And maybe some of those questions are, how are you dealing with what's going on in your life right now? Like, what needs to serve you better? What are some of the things weighing you down that are just, like, for me, how I'm feeling is like I've got some things going on in my life that, like, they're to their final breaking point. Like, I can try to avoid it or run from it or pretend it's not real or pretend it doesn't bother me or pretend it's not that heavy, but it is heavy and it is breaking me, and I am at my wit's end and I'm tired, and I've got, it's time. It is time for me to start to lay down this burden. And instead of feeling like I have to do this all at once, it's, at least for me, I'm feeling like, okay, it's time for me to show up in a full transparency right now, in full honesty. It's time for me to really acknowledge, I guess, like, all of the water that's in my vessel right now, in the spirit of Aquarius, and maybe got to dump it out and kind of see what's there and watch and let it transform or become something new. And so full moons can sometimes be a time of huge clarity or realizations, and sometimes they're a deep time of letting go from a place of illumination, of a place of culmination, of knowing. And so I guess that's what we have to deal with. That's what's ahead. And I will have a much better summary of that up on my website later this week. You can download my full moon guide. And I always include a ritual, but I think for this one, it's definitely going to have to be something around letting go, because I know that's what I need right now. And, the whole point of this podcast is this idea of, if I'm going through some of this stuff, then probably somebody else out there can relate to it even a bit from with it. And maybe me just sharing it and putting it out there will make you feel better. And so I know that I have so much that I need to let go of right now. And you know what sucks about that? The thing that sucks the most about admitting that you have so much stuff to let go of is that the actual holding on part is so subconscious. I think there are certain people out there who are very conscious of holding on to things, or you can see it in how they move through life. And who knows, I'm sure if you ask Dave, he would probably say, no, I literally watch you do it. But I feel like in my experience, the stuff I need to let go of is stuff that I am holding on to subconsciously. It's stuff that comes out of a reaction to not feeling safe or not feeling secure or feeling afraid. It's those kind of things that kind of make me kind of reach out and want to pull in and to hold on and to control things. And I'm feeling that right now, and I feel like a huge amount of self-compassion is needed. And I'm going to be talking more about self-compassion in today's episode because it was actually the topic yesterday for our A Bit From Within July Connect and Gentle yoga class. So I have all of these thoughts that kind of were stimulated yesterday by the general community talk that I want to kind of expand on and share for sure. But just kind of finishing what's been going on in my personal life and how I'm trying to deal with it all. I think it was really Dave leaving town for 10 days and now that he's back and trying to realize the amount of like tidal waves that movement brought into our life and into our dynamic. And it's really made me feel, afraid for sure. I mean, I feel safe to admit that because I've, obviously Dave and I have been having a lot of long, big talks. But I think what is worse, and the reason why I feel confident and safe sharing this out into the world is, one, I don't think people talk enough about the hard things that go on in their relationships. I feel like all you ever see on social media is pictures of people that are together out having beers or out having dinner or doing like out at a game together and how happy their life is. And you don't hear people say like, yeah, I just had a huge freaking blowout fight with my partner and fell apart and we talked it out, and we're still working through this song and dance that we're doing. And I know that for me, I have so often questioned the health of my relationship based on standards that like everybody else is like doing okay in theirs, so why am I not doing great in mine? But I've also tried to stop thinking of it that way, because the amount of progress that Dave and I have made in our relationship while being in couples therapy, and just our commitment to each other, and trying to work through a lot of our issues, is where I think the actual win is, where the actual success is. And relationships are not easy. I think my whole life I felt like a relationship would make everything easier. And there are parts of life that do get solved in relationships, right? Like, especially nowadays, it is much easier to live off of two incomes than one. It is, I think, a lot easier sometimes to cook for two people or more than for yourself. It is really comforting to come home when you're going through something and have somebody to talk to. But those things aren't like, you can't just have those, with just being in a relationship, right? You can always get some of those needs met through friendships and things like that. And I actually think that being in a real relationship is very, very difficult. I'm a wedding photographer, so I always hear pastors talk during, the ceremony about how difficult relationships are, and how trying they can be, and how much of a sacrifice it can be to choose one another and the life that you're creating together over just selfishly living your life how you want by yourself, right? Like, relationships are very difficult sometimes. And what's also very difficult is when one person is going through something, it affects both of you. And I think for us, speaking from my perspective and my relationship with Dave, like, he went out of town to visit his family, and I just imagined that he would go and come back, and we'd jump right back into how things were going, like the waters essentially would be the same. And instead, it's like he came back with, I don't know, a totally different vehicle, or with like a cannonball wave jump into the pool. And it's not good or bad. It's just rocked things in a way that I didn't expect and that I didn't plan for. And I think the last couple days have been me kind of trying to protect myself against that, and kind of maybe poking out a little bit, and also trying to pull in. And it really hasn't got us anywhere. It's really tough. It's tough because sometimes there's no amount of conversation that can solve things. Sometimes you just need time for the waves to change, to slow, for it to transform, for it to lead you somewhere else. And that's why I thought that card on impatience was so relevant, because there is a significant amount of patience called for right now. And that's the other thing about relationships, is that it doesn't matter how much patience that you have exercised in the past. It doesn't matter how giving you have been, how sacrificing you've been, how understanding you've been, how empathetic you've been. Those things don't matter in the long run, because each situation, it calls for its own unique set of ingredients. It's like cooking, right? It's like, just because you've made a million dishes with chicken before doesn't mean that you don't need to go out and like buy new ingredients for what you're cooking now. Every single situation that you move through in life requires the tools and the ingredients to get through it, even if you've used them all a ton before, right? You can't put extra I hope you guys are enjoying all these metaphors. I feel like I'm on a roll with these. But it doesn't matter like how much garlic you've used in your past cooking. You can't like overdo the garlic in your cooking in the past and expect it to pay off in the one in the future, right? And that's not to say that like you don't flex those skills and practice, and like, or that it doesn't matter that you've been patient, or that you've been understanding or that you've, worked hard in the past. It does matter, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to be those things again during this new situation. So I do feel like it'll all be okay somehow. At least that's how I'm feeling right now. But it also, like I said, the thing that I need to exercise right now that I am not good at is taking space and actually practicing that solitude, which is hard because I grew up with a lot of codependent tendencies, and I like to get involved and find reassurance and have communication that everything is all well and good. And sometimes that's not necessary. Sometimes it's just important to sit with your own feelings and to work on yourself. And that's why I said self-compassion is so the theme right now. So I want to talk more about self-compassion, but I'm going to take a quick break and then we're going to come back and dive into it. So like I mentioned, yesterday we had our July A Bit From Within Connect and Gentle Yoga class. And it's this cool thing that I recently started doing where once a month we can come together and talk for about 30 minutes on a subject, hear other people's A Bit From Within, so you're not always just hearing my perspective, kind of connect, gain insight, and then do a gentle yoga class afterwards and actually have, some space to integrate some of those thoughts, maybe set some new intentions, and of course, just enjoy some yoga. And yesterday's topic was on the topic of self-compassion. And it was one that I was really excited for because you guys know me, I'm always advocating self-care. And you cannot have acts of self-care without elements of self-compassion. But I do always say with an asterisk, like actually taking care of yourself and actually giving yourself compassion is not always easy work, right? Like we cannot confuse self-care only with things that make us feel good. Sometimes the work is actually very painful, or the things that we have to go through are not fun. Sometimes they're uncomfortable. And one of the things that I kind of took away from yesterday's conversation was this idea that that you've showed self-compassion when after you've chosen to do something that it leaves you feeling better inside. So it's not always going through it that feels good. Sometimes it's how you feel afterwards. And I kind of liked this as this barometer of whether you have actually showed yourself self-care or not, because I feel like for me, the thing that always comes to mind when you think of self-care is like a bubble bath, which, don't get me wrong, I love a great bath, but I can't tell you how many times I've taken a bath as though it was this act of self-care, and I stayed in the same mental space throughout, and I got out of the bath with the same worries and heaviness on my shoulders and exhaustion that I had before I took the bath. And I've also had very wonderful baths where I have deeply taken care of myself, where I've put the phone away, that I've got a really big glass of water with lemon inside of it, and I took deep breaths and I allowed myself to sink into the water, and I felt myself use it as an actual self-care ritual where when I got out of the bath, I was feeling more relaxed and I was feeling healthier, both mentally and physically. And I think that is the barometer for whether you are actually taking care of yourself and meeting yourself. Another great way to look at that is with the stuff that's not always fun, but that we need to do, right? Like if we have these big goals for like trips we want to take or credit cards we want to pay off or something we want to buy, but we're working on our finances, then maybe that act of self-care is not just giving ourselves that and spending blindly and saying we'll figure it out later if that's going to stress us out more, but actually looking at the budget and seeing where we're spending money and knowing where we can choose to reallocate those resources and pursuing it that way. And going through that work of looking at your budget is not always fun. At least it's not for me. I don't know about you, but like sometimes looking at finances is not fun. But sometimes after I've done it, or if I'm moving towards those goals, I feel a heck of a lot better afterwards. So I think just keeping that in mind as we kind of have this talk on self-compassion is, just that idea that we do need to be able to meet ourselves. And so much of another thing that came up yesterday from everyone that just, it really struck me as how important and how wise this was coming from everyone, was this idea of how vulnerable it is to treat yourself and meet yourself with compassion. Because, one of the definitions that's often used with self-compassion is that you're treating yourself the way that you would a friend. And as I was thinking about this, I was thinking how often and how easy it is that we deny ourselves what we would easily extend to others. It's like we hold ourselves to a different standard. The example that I used yesterday that's still coming to mind today is like if you were in a little fender bender during a rainstorm, right? Like you're soaked, you have this, maybe car accident, or, you've banged up your car, you banged up somebody else's car, you've been dealing with maybe police or AAA or insurance, all of these really unfun things. You get home and you immediately just start taking care of it all. You're just, you're soaking wet and you're like on the phone with the insurance and you're beating yourself up and you're wishing it wasn't the way that it was. That's how you might go through that. But if you were to treat yourself with self-compassion, you would show up for yourself the way that you would show up for a friend. So if a friend walked into your house all covered in rain and having just got in this car accident, you would, pull them in and get them into dry clothes and tell them to relax for a second with a cup of tea and ask them how they felt and if there was anything you could do to support them and really hold space for them. And sometimes we deny ourselves that because we are so conditioned to hold ourselves to a different standard and to deny ourselves the compassion that we need so often. And when I look up the actual word compassion, it says to suffer with. That's where like kind of the root of compassion comes from. It's like when you have compassion for somebody, you're not condemning them. You're not telling them what they should do. That you're also not taking care of it for them, right? You're suffering with them. You are in that moment sharing and empathizing with how it feels. And that, I think, is what is needed with that self-compassion sometimes. It's like I've been trying to think of this for myself today while I've been, going through all of this stuff with Dave and just going through it's not even as much with him as it is my experience inside of what's going on inside of our relationship, right? Like I'm viewing it through my lens. And it's like, wow, I need to recognize how much I'm suffering right now. I need to have this moment of recognition around, holy cow, like you've got a lot on your mind. You're feeling a ton of pressure. You need to take some of that pressure off. You need to realize that some of this stuff is big stuff that's going to take time. Other ways that I can kind of feel myself or meet myself with self-compassion right now is just giving myself the space to move through it, right? And understanding or giving myself time to understand all that has happened and why it has happened, right? As I look back at the kind of breadcrumbs that has brought me to this moment. And I think what I would normally want to do is ignore all of that and just try to resolve it and try to move on as quickly as possible. But that's not actually giving myself compassion with this. And again, self-compassion isn't just, oh, Felicia, you're right about all of this. Like your perspective is the only perspective. You've been really hurt here, blah, 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 right? No. Do I have valid concerns? Do I have valid points? Do I understand where I have come from and why and how I've showed up the way I have? Yeah, I definitely do. But I also have to understand that like there probably are some ways that I caused more problems here, right? That my defensiveness or my pursual or my worries or how I phrase things, the words that I use, my reactions, all of it has contributed to this dance and to this experience that I have had. And self-compassion means sitting down right now and admitting like, wow, the last couple days have been a lot. You're tired. You are mentally and emotionally exhausted. You've had a lot on your plate. You've been working your butt off the past, at least since June really started, since we started shooting all these weddings, and now we've been editing all these weddings, and I am very much exhausted. And so I need to put more effort right now into nurturing myself and taking care of myself. That's kind of how Dave and I left things, is I just told him, I'm like, listen, we're going to have to take some time over the next couple of days to really just take care of ourselves. Like that's what we need more than anything, is like, I need to step out of those codependent ways, and I need to realize that like my priority and my focus needs to be on sitting with myself right now. And that might mean, reading some good books that kind of comfort me. That might mean sitting with my cards and kind of doing some praying and sitting in ritual. That might mean going to bed a little bit earlier. That might mean journaling and really reflecting on what's going on inside of me and what I'm going to do about it, and releasing what I can. And I tell you what, that is not fun stuff. That is not stuff that I'm necessarily looking forward to doing, right? That's not like what I would really want to be doing, is like getting a giant chocolate cake from like the baker and laying on the couch and binge watching like Project Runway or something like that. Like that is what I would want to do if I just wanted to comfort myself. But it's not always about comfort. It's also about self-compassion. And it's about meeting myself where I am and understanding why I am the way that I am, and also giving myself the space to change, to accommodate, to feel and move through those waves of change that are all around me. So that's kind of part of what I'm thinking with self-compassion. And I'm just so curious. I know that some of you listening were part of that conversation yesterday, and I wonder about the things that you have thought of since that conversation. And even those of you who are just listening right now for the first time, considering this perspective on self-compassion, it's like, what are the ways that you really use self-compassion in your life? How do you meet yourself with compassion? And the last thing I'll share on this idea of self-compassion is what I was thinking about during the yoga class portion of this class. I had kind of instructed, see if you can see yourself for all that you are right now. Like as we're sitting here, hands on our hearts, see if you can see yourself fully, with your worries, your stresses, your excitement, your joys, your pains, just all of it. See yourself fully. And then, as though you were seeing yourself as a friend, give your friend the yoga practice that your friend could use. So instead of beating yourself up for not being as deep in your lunge, or, cranking your neck to the side, it's like, actually, maybe you need to move slower. Maybe you need to listen to the way that your, side body is fully going to open. Maybe you need to actually rest without worry in Shavasana. Maybe you need to let those hips sink a little heavier. Maybe you need to notice that you're pulling your knees away from the ground in Baddha Konasana because you're stressed. And maybe you can let yourself relax into it. Give yourself those things that if your friend was practicing yoga, you'd be like, relax, enjoy this, or like getting a massage, right? Like, enjoy this massage. But how often when we are going through it that we don't fully let ourselves relish in things or receive the things that we need. Instead, there's an element of holding back or withdrawing or fronting or pushing away, and if with real self-compassion, you're going to allow yourself to receive those things, even if it is extremely vulnerable, because receiving is vulnerable and resting is vulnerable, and facing your fears or facing your truth is vulnerable. But you are capable. I am capable. You are capable. We are capable of moving through this and of giving ourselves it, because you know why? Because we know we will be better off for it. We know that we will be better humans, that we'll have a better life experience, that will show up as better people, right? That's that, you guys. So normally, because I did a card drawing at the beginning, I would just say that was it, but not today. Today, I've also got Super Attractor deck here, and I know that the message will be a little bit different here at the end than that I was kind of sorting through at the beginning. So let's see here. Let's see what this card reading at the end of today's practice, you can tell I'm in yoga teacher mode, the end of today's conversation, of today's podcast episode. Let's see what the universe has to share for us. The more I attune my energy with appreciation, the more the universe will deliver. That one's a little hard for me, not because it's not true, it's so true, but it makes me have to swallow this little bit of a hard pill that even though there's been plenty of things that I could have been appreciating over the last few days, my energy has not been in that place of appreciation. And I meet myself, with a little bit of compassion with that, not saying like dismissing it and saying like that's totally fine, but more just like, yep, that's true. Like I could have showed up with a little bit more of appreciation for Dave, for having him home, for the good success that we've had with the business this weekend, all the weddings we've delivered, for the awesome wedding I had this weekend with one of my colleagues, for the food that we've eaten, for what an awesome dog I have. He's so easygoing, for connecting with my mom, with my family, with my sister. She moved successfully. There's so much that I could have, if that switch was flipped on, it'd probably been a little bit, I wonder what would have been a little easier. So, what a wonderful suggestion from the universe with this card. The more I attune my energy with appreciation, the more the universe will deliver. It feels like a really wonderful promise. So take that for what you will. Enjoy the rest of your week ahead. Definitely go check out the full moon guide that's up on my website, or at least it should be by Tuesday evening. So depending on when you're listening to this. And yeah, just if you have a bit from within that you'd want to share that this podcast made you think about, please let me know, whether you just tag me on Instagram or shoot me a direct message, or maybe this makes you want to join our Patreon, like the A Bit From Within Patreon, and actually get more classes and ad-free episodes of this podcast and those connect and gently live classes and connections and the meditations. There's lots and lots going on here. That's all for us to actually hold space, for us to really be ourselves and to continue to support our well-being as we move through life. So thank you so much for joining today, and until next time.